My name's Essay, and I work in the writer's room, part of the support staff currently. So my title is script coordinator, and there's usually 3 to 4 support staff members. There's the writer's production assistant, the writer's assistant, showrunner's assistant, and the script coordinator. Sometimes researcher, so maybe 5. I'm a script coordinator, and basically what my job is first and foremost, I'm a proofreader. All versions of the scripts, all revisions, all drafts come through me, and I comb through it, give it a read over, make sure everything's spelled correctly, everything's pretty, make sure the formatting looks good, and slug lines are tracking the way they're supposed to. Like, for example, if a scene takes place in Kim's coffee shop, but later on it says Kim's cafe, you want to make sure that it matches Kim's coffee shop all the way through the script. So that's the first part of my job, and that's primarily what I do while the room is running and the writers are working on scripts. My real job kind of kicks in once production starts. Once we start shooting, I kind of become a liaison between the writers department and the rest of production. So not only am I distributing every version of the script to every department in production, but I'm also usually the first person they come to when they have questions about the script. If wardrobe is like, what time of year is this scene? Like, what would this character be wearing? That's usually a question that comes to me first. And usually I'll have the answer for that, but oftentimes I don't. So then I'll just go to the showrunner and ask them. So I'm kind of like an in-between. One of my, a writer that I worked with in a previous room had a good way of describing the script coordinating job. He called it the customer service of the writer's department. So that, I think that's very accurate. It can be a kind of thankless job sometimes, but because they only catch your mistakes. So a lot of just going between different departments and whatnot. And then also, I think maybe the more fun part of my job as someone who is a writer and, wants to eventually be hired as a writer, a lot of the writing that the writers don't want to deal with falls on the script coordinator. So if there are any graphics or props, for example, I was on a show that was very historically based. So there were a lot of newspaper props. And accuracy was very important to the show. Even though you're not really seeing much of the writing of the newspaper on screen, they still want to make sure it's accurate. So a large part of my job was drafting fake news articles that are based on real ones and writing those up. I was on another show where the main characters are students and they're about to graduate from law school, and they're rereading each other's grad school admissions essays. So I wrote the admissions essays, basically. So there is some writing involved, and it's usually very tedious stuff that is on screen or may be seen on screen for like a half second, but it's not necessarily like dialogue and whatnot. And then I also do a lot with the clearance department. So I work with legal. Whenever a new character name comes into a draft of a script, we have to clear it to be on television. So I usually am the one sending the names to clearance to get cleared, and then relaying it back to the showrunner that, hey, this is good to go. Same with like company names. And oftentimes the script coordinator is the one creating those too. Like sometimes they're making those up, sending them to the showrunner's approving them, and then you send them back to legal and say, hey, these are good to go. Like I was watching Barry the other day with one of my friends who worked on that show, and there's a storefront. It was like Kleinops Mechanic or something like that. I don't know. It's a fake storefront. And she was like, oh, that's the last name of our AD. And so the script coordinator probably took the AD's name and then sent it off to clear. So that is the basic gist of being a script coordinator. So I started as a writer's production assistant on How to Get Away with Murder. That was my first show. I was actually very fortunate in that regard. I think it was kind of the perfect show to land on. Sorry, actually that wasn't my first show, but it was one of my first writer's production jobs. But what happened was the writer's assistant was on her way out because she got staffed to write on a different TV show. And so she left while I was there, and then I stepped in to fill her position and became the writer's assistant. And then the script coordinator had been on the show for like 3 years. She wanted to be bumped up and felt like maybe she had a better shot as the writer's assistant. And since she had seniority and we were good friends too. And she was just like, I want to be the writer's assistant. And so she then took over that job and then trained me to be the script coordinator, which was really cool because script coordinating is kind of like a weird job for writers. Like it's not the typical skill set that we use. And so it's really nice having her there while I learned on the job. So I could ask her any questions anytime something came up, and she's like a pro script coordinator. So I think it prepared me to have all the tools needed to move forward. But yeah, that's how I fell into that. It kind of accidentally in a way, but it's a good job to have if you want to bounce around in different rooms. I wish it weren't that way. I think it's all about kind of finding your rhythm with working and creating at the same time. Admittedly, I haven't always been the best at that, but typically what I would do is, if it's a slow day at work, like oftentimes script coordinating jobs don't really kick into gear until post 4 p.m. There'll be times where you're like sitting there like all day, and then 4 p.m. comes and boom, everything's on fire. So oftentimes what I would do is at work, I would work on my own stuff. I wasn't doing anything for the job. Occasionally, I've been good about coming home post work and then putting like an hour of work in on my own scripts, and then eating dinner and taking care of myself, and then occasionally a weekend here and there. For example, later tonight I'm co-writing something with a friend of mine, so we're meeting up after work hours and getting it done. So it can definitely be a challenge, but I think it's also really restorative in a way to have your creative endeavors going while you work, because the job does become a job, and it's really cool to be around what you want to do, but it is a job at the end of the day. So you kind of need something that refuels you. Actually, that's something that I would suggest too, outside of even creating. Like, it's good to have hobbies that have nothing to do with entertainment or like what you want to do in life, because that's also super restorative. You need to unplug sometimes. Number one, and this can't be emphasized enough, and this is what my professors told me in grad school, this is what I continue to tell people, it's what I continue to learn, is network. Like they say it's who you know, and that cannot be more true. The more people you get to know, the more genuine relationships you form, the better. Again, I feel like very blessed that I'm kind of at a place where when I end a job, I kind of just reach out to my network and say, hey, I'm free, and then another job comes. So the more people you can meet, again, the better the relationships. Like, that goes a long way. Number two would be to don't stop creating and don't stop pursuing, because a lot of this is a numbers game. A lot of it's patience, persistence, just constant work. And I don't mean that in like a labor way necessarily, just like, you need to always be moving towards something, I guess. And that's not to say constantly be working, because I don't believe in that either. Rest is important. But if you want to be a writer, it's good to have things in your pocket. People will ask, like, what are you working on? And if you have something that you can give an elevator pitch for, that's great. And if you have the script behind it, even better, because people will actually ask to read it, and you never know what doors that could open up. Number three, I think, would be to work around what you want to be doing. So just because you don't get the dream job right off the bat doesn't mean like you're not going to eventually. It doesn't mean that you failed in any way. It doesn't mean that you can't get there. I found and find that putting yourself in positions to be where you want to be goes a long way, and eventually you'll get to where you want to be. So for example, when I first graduated, I think a lot of us had it in our heads that we were just gonna, find room jobs and work our way up the ladder immediately. And one, room jobs aren't like advertised publicly, so it's like hard to even know where to find them. And two, it just doesn't really work that way. After a few months of trying to hear word of mouth and joining like job forums and whatnot and applying all over the place, and nothing kind of biting, I opened up my umbrella or my net that I was casting for jobs. And, initially I was like, I don't want to work at an agency. I have no interest in doing that. But eventually I started applying to agencies and management companies. And so the first job that I got was as an assistant to two managers on a desk. So I'm doing a lot of administrative stuff, but my bosses represent writers. So I'm like, okay, I'm close to the action. I also got to learn a lot about how the business works in that job. So it was very helpful. And my bosses knew that I wanted to write ultimately. So they kind of helped me get my first writer's PA job. and then things just kind of built from there. So I would say if you can't land the dream job initially, just work around what you want to be doing. There are no rules in this industry, and all roads can lead to Rome. So, just keep on trying new things and putting yourself in different positions. And honestly, I think it's all beneficial because the more you learn about the industry, the more tools you have to navigate it.